The dust of Varkos never truly settled. It hung in perpetual suspension, a testament to the unending violence that had scarred the planet's surface. In the makeshift medical outpost, Nurse Kayla Sorensen wiped her brow, leaving a streak of rusty brown across her forehead, a mixture of human blood and the planet's omnipresent dust. The field hospital was little more than a collection of prefabricated pods dropped hastily from orbit 3 weeks earlier. Their white exterior now stained the same burnt orange as everything else on this forsaken world. 6 hours had passed since the ambush. The medical bay overflowed with the wounded and dying, their moans forming a macabre symphony that had become the background noise to Kayla's existence. She moved mechanically between cots, checking vital signs, administering pain suppressants, and marking those beyond saving with a small black dot on their foreheads. A practice she had come to despise, but could not abandon for practicality's sake. "Incoming!" The shout came from outside, followed by the distinctive whine of a dropship's engines fighting against Varkos' dense atmosphere. Kayla didn't look up, continuing to seal a chest wound on a young soldier who couldn't have been more than 19. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated with shock and medication. "You're going to be fine." She lied, knowing the infection had already set in. On Earth, he might have had a chance. Here, with limited supplies and primitive conditions, infection was nearly always a death sentence. Sergeant Mara Kistler burst through the flaps of the medical tent, her armor caked with the same omnipresent dust. They hit the northern perimeter hard. At least 30 more casualties coming in. Captain Wren is requesting all medical personnel to prepare for triage. Kayla nodded, not bothering to point out that they were already operating well beyond capacity. She finished sealing the soldier's wound and marked his chart with a note for additional antibiotics, knowing full well they were running dangerously low. "Any word from Central Command about those supply drops?" Kayla asked, rising to her feet. Her back ached from bending over patients for hours on end. Mara's expression darkened. "Negative. Command says the OROC have established anti-aircraft batteries along the supply routes. Nothing gets through until those are taken out." The OROC. Even after 3 years of conflict, Kayla still found it difficult to fully comprehend the alien species that humanity had encountered on their expansion into the Cygnus arm. Bipedal like humans, but nearly 8 feet tall, with exoskeletons that provided natural armor and gave them a fearsome appearance. Their society was built around concepts of honor and martial prowess that seemed archaic to human sensibilities. Yet, they wielded technology that matched or exceeded Earth's most advanced weaponry. The initial diplomatic missions had gone poorly, cultural misunderstandings escalating to violence within months of first contact. Now, dozens of worlds along the frontier burned as both species fought for dominance of disputed territories. "I'll start preparing additional triage stations," Kayla said, grabbing her medical kit. "Has Dr. Elam been notified?" "He's already at the landing pad," Mara replied, her eyes tracking Kayla's movements with a hint of concern. "You should take a break, Kayla. You've been on shift for 18 hours straight." Kayla managed a tired smile. "I'll rest when they do," she said, gesturing to the rows of wounded soldiers. Outside, the harsh sunlight of Varkos' twin suns momentarily blinded her. The medical outpost had been established in what remained of a mining settlement. The buildings partially collapsed from orbital bombardment. The landing pad was actually the flattened remains of what had once been the settlement's town square, now scorched black from repeated dropship landings. Dr. Elam Voss stood at the edge of the pad, his tall frame stooped with exhaustion. At 62, he was the oldest member of the medical team, a veteran of 3 interplanetary conflicts before humanity had even encountered the Iraq. His experience was invaluable. But Kayla could see the toll the endless stream of casualties was taking on him. "Ah, Nurse Sorensen," he said as she approached. "I was about to send for you. We've got a situation." The dropship was touching down, its engines kicking up a storm of dust. The rear ramp descended before the craft had fully settled, and soldiers began carrying out stretchers. "What kind of situation?" Kayla had to shout over the noise of the engines. Dr. Elam leaned close to her ear. "The patrol that was ambushed reports they may have hit a high-value target, some kind of Iraq commander. If they're right, this could be significant." Kayla felt a flutter of unease. In her 3 years on the front lines, she had treated hundreds of human soldiers, but had never been called upon to provide medical care for an Iraq. The protocols regarding enemy combatants were vague at best, with most wounded Iraq left to the care of their own kind through prisoner exchanges. The stream of wounded flowed past them, each stretcher carrying a broken body to the triage area. Kayla automatically began assessing injuries, categorizing them by severity in her mind. 3rd-degree plasma burns, traumatic amputation, shrapnel wounds, spinal trauma. The litany of suffering was endless. And then she saw it. At first, she thought it was a piece of equipment, perhaps a damaged exosuit. The stretcher required 4 soldiers to carry it, and what lay upon it was so covered in dust and blood that its true nature was obscured. But as they passed, Kayla caught a glimpse of a chitinous arm hanging limply off the side of the stretcher, nearly twice the length of a human limb, ending in a hand with 6 digits. "Is that?" she began. Dr. Elam nodded grimly. "The Iraq commander. Captain Wren wants him stabilized." "Stabilized? For what purpose?" Kayla asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Intelligence gathering." The doctor replied flatly. "If he survives, he could provide valuable information about Iraq deployments in this sector." Kayla had heard rumors about the methods used to extract such information. The euphemisms used in official reports did little to disguise the reality of what amounted to torture. She had joined the medical corps to save lives, not to patch up enemies so they could be broken again in different ways. "I'll handle the preliminary assessment," she said, making a decision that would alter the course of not just her life, but potentially the war itself. "Where are they taking him?" "Isolation Unit 3. It's the only one with restraint capabilities." Dr. Elam said, "Captain Wren has assigned guards. No one goes in or out without authorization." Kayla nodded, already moving toward the medical building. "I'll need a full trauma kit and the portable scanner." "Kayla!" Dr. Elam called after her, his voice carrying a warning. "Remember your oath, but also remember your duty. This isn't a normal patient." She paused, looking back at the old doctor. "With respect, sir, my oath doesn't distinguish between species." Before he could respond, she continued toward the medical building, her mind racing. She had studied Iraq physiology as part of her xenobiological training, but theoretical knowledge was a poor substitute for practical experience. Their biology was similar enough to humans in broad strokes. They had a circulatory system, respiratory organs, and a central nervous system. But the details were alien. Their blood was copper-based rather than iron-based, giving it a bluish-green hue. Their organs were arranged differently, protected by the exoskeleton that covered much of their bodies. Isolation Unit 3 was at the far end of the medical building, separated from the main ward by a series of airlocks designed to prevent the spread of potentially harmful biological agents. In this case, they would serve to keep the Iraq prisoner contained. 2 soldiers stood guard outside the unit, their rifles held at the ready. They straightened as Kyla approached. "Nurse Sorensen." One of them acknowledged her. "Captain Wren said to expect you. The prisoner is inside." "Patient," Kayla corrected automatically. "While they're under my care, they're a patient, not a prisoner." The soldier's expression hardened slightly, but he stepped aside to let her pass. "Just remember what they've done to our people," he said quietly as she entered the access code for the airlock. The outer door hissed open, and Kayla stepped inside, allowing it to seal behind her before the inner door opened. The isolation unit was small, designed for a single human patient. The Iraq lay on a reinforced medical table that still seemed inadequate for his massive frame. His limbs had been secured with heavy-duty restraints, though Kayla noted immediately that this precaution was likely unnecessary. The alien commander was clearly on the verge of death. She approached cautiously, activating the scanner and beginning her assessment. The Iraq's exoskeleton was cracked in multiple places, revealing the softer tissue beneath. A massive wound in his abdomen leaked bluish fluid onto the table, pooling beneath him. His breathing was labored, a whistling sound accompanying each inhalation. Kayla had never been this close to a living Iraq before. In death, they were fearsome enough, their alien features frozen in expressions that humans found difficult to interpret. In life, even grievously wounded, there was an undeniable presence to the creature that made Kayla's heart race with instinctive fear. The scanner completed its initial assessment, displaying the results on Kayla's wrist unit: multiple internal injuries, significant blood loss, organ damage. Without immediate intervention, the prognosis was clear. The Iraq commander would be dead within the hour. She should call Dr. Elam. She should notify Captain Wren. She should follow protocol. Instead, Kayla set down the scanner and opened her medical kit. She removed a vial of specialized synthetic blood substitute developed for Iraq physiology, a recent addition to their supplies, intended for use in the increasingly rare prisoner exchanges. The Iraq's eyes suddenly opened, 3 vertical slits on each side of his elongated head. They focused on Kayla with startling intensity. And a sound emerged from what passed for his mouth, a series of clicks and guttural noises that her translator implant rendered into English with a slight delay. "Finish it." Kayla froze, the vial in her hand. "What?" For a moment, Kayla considered her options. The ethical dilemma was clear. This being was asking her to end his suffering, to grant him the dignity of death rather than capture and interrogation. By the standards of his own culture, such a request might be considered honorable. But she had not become a nurse to take lives. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly, loading the blood substitute into an injection device calibrated for Iraq physiology. "My name is Kayla Sorensen. I'm a nurse. I don't know if you can understand me fully, but I'm going to try to stabilize your condition." The Iraq's eyes seemed to narrow, focusing more intently on her. "Why?" "Help. Enemy." Kayla administered the injection directly into what she knew to be a major vascular junction in the Iraq's neck, one of the few places where the exoskeleton was thin enough to allow for direct access to the circulatory system. "Because right now, you're not an enemy," she replied. "You're a patient." The isolation unit's door hissed open behind her, and Kayla turned to see Captain Wren entering, followed by 2 more soldiers. The captain was a hard-faced woman in her 40s, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death to be easily moved by more of it. "Report, Nurse Sorensen," she demanded, her gaze fixed on the Iraq. Kayla straightened. "The patient has sustained multiple severe injuries. I've administered a blood substitute to compensate for hypovolemic shock. But he requires surgery to repair internal damage." Captain Wren's eyes flicked to Kayla. "Is he stable enough for questioning?" "No, Captain. He's barely conscious and in critical condition. Any interrogation would likely result in his death." The captain's expression didn't change. "And that would be a tragedy, wouldn't it?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "We've identified him. This is General Hraun, commander of the Iraq 7th Talon. His forces are responsible for the massacre at New Proxima. Over 5,000 civilians dead." Kayla felt a chill. She had heard of the New Proxima massacre. Everyone had. It had been one of the most devastating attacks on a human colony since the war began. Entire families wiped out. Infrastructure destroyed beyond repair. The images of the aftermath had been broadcast throughout human space, fueling the hatred of the Iraq to new heights. And now the architect of that atrocity lay before her, dependent on her care for his survival. Intelligence wants him alive. Captain Wren continued. "Do whatever you need to do to keep him breathing, but don't waste resources. We have our own people to consider." Without waiting for a response, the captain turned and left, leaving the two soldiers behind as guards. Kayla stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. If what Captain Wren said was true, then the being before her was responsible for unspeakable suffering. By any moral calculus, he deserved whatever fate awaited him. Yet, as she looked at the wounded Iraq, at Hraun, she saw only a patient in desperate need. The scanner beeped, indicating a further drop in vital signs. Kayla made her decision. She would do what she had always done. She would fight to save a life, regardless of whose it was. The consequences would come later. She worked feverishly, applying emergency field surgery techniques adapted for Iraq physiology. The synthetic blood helped stabilize his circulation, but the internal damage was severe. One of what she understood to be the primary respiratory organs was partially collapsed, and several segments of the digestive tract had been perforated. As she worked, Kayla became aware that Hraun was watching her. His eyes never left her face, tracking her movements with an intensity that was unnerving. Occasionally, he would make those clicking sounds again, but her translator couldn't make sense of them. Either they were too quiet or in some dialect it wasn't programmed to understand. Hours passed. The two guards changed shift, replaced by two others who regarded Kayla with open suspicion as she continued to work on saving the life of humanity's enemy. Dr. Elam checked in once, his expression grim as he reviewed her work. "Captain Wren is getting impatient," he murmured to her quietly. "Intelligence officers are already here, waiting to begin their debriefing. He's not stable enough." Kayla insisted. Any additional stress could trigger a cascade failure. Dr. Elam sighed. "I'll tell them. But Kayla, you need to prepare yourself. Once he's stable enough, he's not our patient anymore. He belongs to intelligence." After the doctor left, Kayla continued her work with a renewed sense of urgency. She knew what Dr. Elam meant. Once intelligence took custody of Hraun, whatever happened to him would no longer be her concern, officially. But she couldn't shake the feeling that saving his life only to hand him over to torture was a perversion of everything she believed in. As night fell on Varkos, the medical outpost grew quieter. Most of the day's casualties had either been stabilized or had succumbed to their injuries. The constant stream of wounded had slowed to a trickle as the fighting died down for the night. A small mercy in an otherwise merciless conflict. Kayla checked Hran's vital signs again. They had stabilized somewhat, though he remained in critical condition. The immediate danger had passed, but his long-term prognosis was uncertain. She should report this to Captain Wren, to tell her that the prisoner was now stable enough for questioning. Instead, she pulled up a stool and sat beside the medical table, studying the alien features of her patient. In repose, with his eyes closed, there was something almost peaceful about him. The fearsome aspects of a rock appearance, the sharp edges of the exoskeleton, the intimidating height, the inhuman proportions, seemed diminished in his injured state. "I know you can hear me," she said softly. "I don't know if you understand why I helped you. I'm not sure I fully understand it myself." Hran's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with that same intense gaze. "Your people and mine." His voice was stronger now, the translator having less trouble with his speech. "Cannot coexist." "Why not?" Kayla asked. "We've barely tried. The diplomatic missions were a disaster from the beginning. Cultural misunderstandings, territorial disputes, resource competition. None of these are insurmountable problems. Honor demands conflict." The words came with obvious effort. "Strength determines right." Kayla shook her head. "That's not how we see it. Strength should protect weakness, not exploit it. Weakness is culled." Hran's chest rose and fell rapidly. His breathing labored. "This is natural law." "Is that why you ordered the attack on New Proxima? To cull the weak?" Kayla couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Hran was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer, forcing Kayla to lean closer to hear. "I did not order civilian deaths, warriors, fight warriors." "Then why?" "Mistake." The single word hung in the air between them. Targeting error, not honorable. Kayla sat back, stunned. If Hran was telling the truth, and she had no way of knowing if he was, then the massacre that had inflamed human hatred of the Iraq might have been an accident, a terrible miscalculation rather than deliberate genocide. Before she could press him further, the door to the isolation unit slid open. Sergeant Mara stood there, her expression a mixture of urgency and concern. "Kayla, you need to come with me, now!" "What's happening?" "The Iraq are making a push toward our position. Intelligence thinks they know we have Hran, and they're coming to get him back." Mara's eyes darted to the alien commander. "Captain Wren has ordered emergency evacuation protocols. All critical patients are being loaded onto dropships." "And Hran?" Kayla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mara's expression hardened. "He's not going. Intelligence wants to extract what they can before the position is overrun, then ensure he doesn't fall back into enemy hands." The meaning was clear. Once they had whatever information they could torture out of him, Hran would be executed. "That's against every protocol for handling prisoners of war." Kayla protested. "This is war, Kayla. Protocols are luxuries we can't always afford." Mara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know you've been working hard to save him, but you need to think about our people now. The wounded need you on those evacuation ships." Kayla looked back at Hran, whose eyes remained fixed on her. Did he understand what was happening? Could he comprehend that his fate had been decided by people who saw him only as a source of information and then a liability to be eliminated? "Give me a few minutes to stabilize him for transport," she said, making a decision that would change everything. "I need to administer additional medication and ensure the surgical repairs will hold." Mara nodded. 5 minutes. Then you need to be at the landing pad." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful, Kayla. Don't let sympathy cloud your judgment. Remember what they are." As soon as Mara left, Kayla moved quickly. She gathered additional medical supplies, focusing on portable items that could be easily carried. She checked Hran's restraints, noting that while they were secure, the control panel that operated them was accessible from her side of the medical table. "They're going to kill you," she said bluntly to Hran, "after they torture you for information." Hran's eyes blinked slowly. Expected, honorable, death. "There's nothing honorable about torture," Kayla retorted. She hesitated, then continued, "I can help you escape." The Iraq commander's reaction was subtle, a slight widening of his eye slits, a change in his breathing pattern. Why? It was a good question. Why was she risking everything, her career, possibly her life, for an enemy combatant? Was it merely professional ethics, or something deeper? A fundamental belief in the sanctity of life that transcended the artificial boundaries of species and conflict. "Because this war has taken enough," she said finally. "And because you said New Proxima was a mistake. If that's true, then maybe there are others on both sides who want this to end." Hran was silent for several moments. Then, with obvious effort, he moved his head in what Kayla recognized as an approximation of a human nod. "How?" Kayla explained her plan quickly. It was simple out of necessity. She would release his restraints and help him to the rear exit of the medical building. In the confusion of the evacuation, they might be able to reach the perimeter where the fighting would soon break out. If they could get close enough to the Iraq lines, Hran might be recovered by his own people. It was desperate, with a high probability of failure, but it was the only chance he had. Kayla released the restraints. Hran's massive form remained motionless for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe he was free. Then, with her assistance, he began to sit up. The movement clearly caused him intense pain, but he made no sound beyond a slight increase in his breathing rate. "Can you walk?" she asked, knowing that at his full height, Hran would tower over her by at least 3 feet. "With difficulty," he responded. "Lead, I follow." Kayla nodded, gathering the last of her supplies. She helped Hran to his feet, supporting as much of his weight as she could. Though it was like trying to support a falling tree. He hunched over, both from pain and to reduce his height, leaning heavily on her. They moved to the rear door of the isolation unit, which led to a service corridor used for bringing in supplies. Kayla keyed in her access code, praying that the evacuation protocols hadn't already locked down the section. The door slid open. The corridor beyond was dimly lit and appeared empty. Outside, the sounds of the evacuation were growing louder, engines roaring, shouted orders, the occasional burst of weapons fire from the perimeter. They moved slowly, painfully down the corridor. Hran's massive weight threatened to crush Kayla with each step, but she gritted her teeth and continued forward. At the end of the corridor was another door that would lead them outside, to the rear of the medical building where the waste disposal units were located. They were halfway to the exit when the lights suddenly brightened, and an alarm began to sound. A mechanical voice announced, Perimeter breach. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Repeat. Perimeter breach. The Iraq attack had begun sooner than expected. Kayla felt a surge of both fear and hope. The chaos of battle might make their escape easier, but it also increased the danger exponentially. They reached the exit. Kayla pressed her hand to the scanner, and the door slid open to reveal the harsh landscape of Varkos. The twin suns had set, but the sky was illuminated by the flashes of weapons fire and the glow of burning vehicles in the distance. The sound of battle was much louder now, a cacophony of explosions, energy weapons, and ballistic fire. Which direction? Kayla asked, scanning the horizon for the likeliest location of the Iraq forces. Raun raised one massive arm, pointing to the northwest, where the flashes of combat seemed most intense. There, my warriors. They began moving again, skirting the edge of the outpost, using the buildings for cover. Raun's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The exertion of movement was reopening his wounds. Kayla could feel the warm, sticky sensation of his bluish blood seeping through the field dressings and onto her uniform. They had covered perhaps 100 meters when a shout came from behind them. "Halt! Don't move!" Kayla turned to see two human soldiers, their weapons raised and aimed directly at them. One she recognized as one of the guards who had been stationed outside the isolation unit. "Step away from the prisoner. Nurse Sorensen." The soldier ordered, his finger tense on the trigger of his rifle. "He needs medical attention." Kayla said, not moving. "I'm taking him to the evacuation point." "Bullshit." The second soldier snarled, "You're helping him escape. That's treason, nurse." Raun stirred beside her, straightening slightly despite the obvious pain it caused him. "Let her go," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and guttural sounds into rough English. "She is not part of this." "Shut up, you alien bastard," the first soldier said, taking a step forward. "Nurse Sorensen, this is your last warning. Step away or we'll fire." Time seemed to slow for Kayla. She could see the determination in the soldier's eyes, the hatred directed at Raun, the suspicion now focused on her. They would shoot, and in Raun's weakened state, a single blast would be enough to kill him. Without fully understanding her own actions, Kayla did the only thing she could think of. She moved in front of Raun, placing her body between him and the soldier's weapons. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let you kill an unarmed, wounded prisoner." "He's the enemy," the second soldier shouted. "He's killed hundreds of our people." "And how many of his have we killed?" Kayla countered. "When does it end? When every last one of them is dead? Or every last one of us?" A new voice entered the confrontation. What the hell is going on here? Captain Wren strode into view, her sidearm drawn. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Kayla standing protectively in front of the towering, wounded Iraq commander. "Captain," one of the soldiers began, "we found Nurse Sorensen attempting to—" "I can see what she's doing." Wren cut him off, her cold gaze fixed on Kayla. "Step aside, nurse. That's an order." Kayla remained where she was. "With respect, Captain, I cannot comply with that order. It violates the Medical Corps oath and the interstellar conventions on the treatment of prisoners of war. This isn't a classroom debate on ethics." "Sorensen," Wren said, her voice dangerous. "This is a battlefield, and that creature behind you has the blood of thousands on his hands. So do we all." Kayla replied quietly, "Isn't that why we're here?" Before Wren could respond, the sound of approaching combat grew suddenly louder. An explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, close enough that they could feel the heat of it. The Arak attack was drawing nearer. "We don't have time for this," Ren snapped. She raised her sidearm, aiming it directly at Kayla. "Final warning, move aside or be charged with treason." Kayla felt Hraun's massive hand on her shoulder, gently trying to push her aside. "No need for this," he said. "Your life, worth more." "No," Kayla said firmly, both to Hraun and to Captain Ren. "No more needless deaths, not his and not mine." The standoff might have ended there, with Ren's patience exhausted and her finger tightening on the trigger, if not for what happened next. A massive explosion tore through the perimeter fence less than 50 meters away, showering them all with debris. In the chaos that followed, dark shapes moved through the dust and smoke, Arak warriors, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable as they advanced into the human outpost. "Contact!" one of the soldiers shouted, swinging his rifle toward the new threat. Weapons fire erupted, energy bolts and projectiles crisscrossing the space between the human defenders and the advancing Arak. Captain Ren was forced to turn her attention to the immediate threat, barking orders to the soldiers. "Fall back to defensive position 3, radio for air support." In the confusion, Kayla made her decision, supporting Hraun as best she could. She began moving away from the firefight, heading toward a collapsed section of building that would provide some cover. They had barely gone 10 meters when a stray energy bolt struck the ground near them, the concussive force knocking them both down. Kayla fell hard, the breath driven from her lungs. Hraun landed beside her with a heavy impact that she felt through the ground. For a moment, Kayla couldn't move, her ears ringing from the explosion. She was vaguely aware of the battle raging around them, of shapes moving through smoke and dust, of the distinctive sounds of both human and Arak weapons. Then, Shitan felt movement beside her. Hraun was trying to rise, his massive form struggling against his injuries and the effects of the blast. Kayla rolled over, pushing herself to her knees. "Stay down," she gasped, reaching for him. "You'll make your injuries worse." But Hraun was looking past her. His 3 slit eyes widened in what she could only interpret as alarm. Kayla turned to follow his gaze and saw Captain Ren emerging from the smoke, her sidearm raised and aimed directly at them. Time slowed again for Kayla. She saw Ren's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the hatred and determination in the captain's eyes. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that Ren intended to kill not just Hraun, but her as well, a traitor in her eyes, deserving of the same fate as the enemy she had chosen to protect. Without conscious thought, acting purely on instinct, Kayla did the only thing she could. She threw herself forward, covering Hraun's massive body with her own much smaller one, wrapping her arms around him as far as they would go, pressing her face against the cracked exoskeleton of his chest. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice carrying across the battlefield with unexpected power. "For God's sake, stop this! He's wounded. He's unarmed. This isn't what we're fighting for." The sudden action seemed to momentarily confuse Ren. Her aim wavered, her expression flickering between determination and uncertainty. And then something remarkable happened. From the Arak lines, the firing slowed, then stopped altogether. A silence fell over that small section of the battlefield, as if both sides were holding their breath, watching the scene unfold. An Arak warrior, taller even than Hraun, and bearing elaborate markings on his exoskeleton that denoted high rank, stepped forward from the smoke. In accented but clear English, amplified by some device, he called out. The human protects General Hran. Why? Kayla, still clutching the wounded Arak commander, looked up at the warrior. Because he's wounded. Because he needs help. Because enough have died already. The Arak commander, for that was clearly what he was, tilted his head in what seemed to be confusion or curiosity. You are a healer. I'm a nurse. Kayla replied. I swore an oath to preserve life. All life. There was a long pause. Then the Arak commander made a series of clicking sounds that weren't translated. In response, the Arak warriors lowered their weapons. We will cease fire. The commander announced, for the healer who protects our general. Captain Wren, her sidearm still raised, looked incredulous. What the hell is this? Some kind of trick? No trick. The Arak commander replied. Honor. The healer shows courage, protects one not of her kind. This is unexpected. Beneath Kayla, Hran stirred. With obvious effort, he raised one massive arm, making a gesture toward the Arak commander. More of those untranslatable clicking sounds followed. The Arak commander straightened, then made a formal gesture that involved crossing both sets of arms across his chest. General Hran commands us to stand down. He says the healer has shown him a different kind of strength. For a moment, no one moved. Human soldiers and Arak warriors stood frozen, weapons still ready but no longer firing. The only sound was the distant battle continuing in other sectors of the perimeter and the labored breathing of Hran beneath Kayla. Then, slowly, Captain Wren lowered her weapon. All units, she said into her comm unit, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Hold fire in Sector 4. I repeat, hold fire in Sector 4. Kayla could scarcely believe what was happening. A localized ceasefire, sparked by nothing more than her desperate, instinctive act of protection. She looked down at Hran, whose eyes were fixed on her with that same intense gaze. Thank you, he managed, his voice barely audible. Perhaps humans and Arak can learn from each other. The Arak commander approached, stopping a respectful distance away. We will take General Hran for healing, he said. The ceasefire will hold while we withdraw. Captain Wren nodded stiffly. Agreed. But this changes nothing about the wider conflict. Perhaps, the Arak commander replied. Perhaps not. His gaze shifted to Kayla. The healer has shown something valuable. Strength is not only in combat. Two Arak warriors approached with what appeared to be a stretcher designed for their kind. Gently, they helped Hran onto it, careful not to exacerbate his injuries. As they prepared to carry him away, Hran reached out one massive hand toward Kayla. She took it, surprised by the gentleness of his grip, despite the size and strength she knew those hands possessed. Remember, Hran said, his voice stronger now, as if he was marshaling his remaining energy for these final words. What happened here? One act can change everything. Kayla nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. As the Arak warriors carried Hran away, the temporary silence on the battlefield seemed to expand, spreading outward from that small sector like ripples on a pond. Captain Wren moved to stand beside Kayla, watching the Arak withdraw. You realize you'll face a court-martial for this, she said, though there was less anger in her voice than before. I know. Kayla replied quietly. It was worth it. Wren was silent for a moment. Then, surprising Kayla, she said, maybe, just maybe, you've done something important here. Sorensen, time will tell. As night fully descended on Varkos, the fighting gradually ceased across the entire perimeter. Word of the localized ceasefire had spread, and commanders on both sides seemed reluctant to be the first to break it. By morning, official communications had been established between the human and Arak forces, the first direct diplomatic contact in over a year. Kayla was indeed arrested and held for court-martial, but as news of what had happened spread, public opinion began to shift. The image, captured by a soldier's helmet camera, of a human nurse wrapping her arms around a wounded Arak commander, placing herself between him and certain death, became a powerful symbol. It was a single moment of compassion amid years of hatred and violence, a reminder that even in the depths of war, humanity could still be found. 3 weeks later, as Kayla sat in her cell awaiting trial, she received a visitor. Dr. Elam entered, looking older and more tired than ever, but with a hint of something like hope in his eyes. "They're dropping the charges," he told her without preamble. "All of them." Kayla stared at him in disbelief. "Why?" "Because General Hraun survived." Elam said, "And he's now the lead negotiator for the Arak in the peace talks that began yesterday." Peace talks? Kayla felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath her had suddenly shifted. "I don't understand." Dr. Elam smiled, the expression transforming his worn face. "It seems your patient had more influence among his people than we realized. He's been advocating for a reassessment of Arak policy toward humans, and he's using what happened between you two as evidence that coexistence is possible." Kayla sat heavily on her bunk, overwhelmed by the implications. "All this because I couldn't let him die? Because you showed compassion where others showed only hatred." Elam corrected gently. "Because you remembered your oath when others forgot theirs." A week later, Kayla found herself in an unprecedented position, invited to attend the peace negotiations as a special observer. The talks were being held on a neutral space station orbiting Varkos, with representatives from both species working to find a path forward that didn't lead to mutual destruction. And there, leading the Arak delegation, was Hraun. He had recovered from his injuries, though Kayla noted that his exoskeleton bore new scars and repairs that would likely remain with him for life. When he saw her enter the chamber, he rose to his full impressive height and made that formal gesture, arms crossed over his chest, that she now understood was a sign of highest respect among the Arak. The human diplomats looked confused by this display toward a simple nurse. But Kayla returned the gesture as best she could. Later, during a recess in the negotiations, Hraun approached her in a corridor, standing before her, no longer wounded and vulnerable, but restored to his full power and authority. He was an intimidating presence, yet Kayla felt no fear. "The healer who changed everything," he said, his translator rendering his speech into much smoother English now. "My people have a saying: the fiercest warrior wins the battle, but the wisest one prevents it. You have taught me wisdom, Kayla Sorensen. I only did what I believed was right." She replied simply, "And in doing so, you demonstrated a strength my people had not recognized in humans." Hraun said, "The strength to show mercy, to protect even an enemy. It is a different kind of power than we are accustomed to respecting." "Will it be enough?" Kayla asked. "Can our peoples really find a way to coexist?" Hraun was silent for a moment, his three-slit eyes studying her with that now familiar intensity. "I do not know," he admitted finally. "The path will not be easy. There is much hatred, much history to overcome." He gestured to his scarred exoskeleton. But like these scars, perhaps the wounds between our peoples can heal, leaving marks that remind us of what we have survived together. As Kayla watched Hran return to the negotiation chamber, she reflected on how a single moment, a nurse wrapping her arms around a dying enemy, had somehow shifted the course of a war. It wasn't a guarantee of peace, not yet. The negotiations would be difficult, the process of building trust even more so. But it was a beginning, a moment when weapons had been lowered, when enemies had seen each other as something more than threats to be eliminated. A recognition that strength could be found not just in the ability to take life, but in the courage to preserve it. And for now, on a planet where the dust never truly settled, that was enough.